and we're hopeful the others will join us soon. Larry is recording the meeting already, so just wanted to remind everybody of that. And thanks to Jennifer and the gang for getting those mentioned in leads, and also links to the recordings there as well. We appreciate that support from our headquarters staff. So we're looking at item 2 from last week, which we did not get to. So I had already sent out the information for you from the 2017 proposed policy, and then comments and suggestions that were relevant to that point, which is how and whether the nominating committee should vet candidates and their statements. So I think you have that. And then what I did is the same thing I did last time. Let me go ahead and share the screen. I put the 2017 proposal as the starting point for our working document tonight. So let me go ahead and share the screen. Again, this is what was from that proposed thing. And there's not a section that actually deals with elections per se in that proposed policy, but I think because the Article 9 of SPJ's bylaws, and because we had several comments regarding to the actual carrying out of the election, that we will probably end up with that as another item. That wasn't technically in our charge for Matt, but I don't see how we can talk about all these other things and not deal with that as well in terms of
I think
continuity and comprehensive.
I think one of
because I know Andy had a lot of comments on that, and I think Lauren did as well.
One of the things we need to figure out is, what is the definition of vetting? And I said after the meeting, I sent an email, and I noted that one of the things Victor sent around, I think the day before, was ONA's policy on nominations, and what that included was a bunch of criteria who could run. And if we're going to establish a set of criteria, and I think it's a valid idea for the nominating committee to have a set of criteria, then vetting means making sure that people meet those criteria to be able to run.
Sounds good to me.
So go ahead.
Bob, if I could just add one other twist to that I liked, and now since I don't have it in front of me, I don't remember if it was from the ONA or the IRE portion, but it may be in multiple places from other associations. The other aspect I like there is that the candidate is obligated to sign a statement that everything that they've provided is true. Mm-hmm. And I would come from the camp of, yes, it's important to do the due diligence and do some vetting, but it is going to be really difficult to have, to place the proper scrutiny and everyone under a microscope, that you've got every, I dotted, T crossed. And at some point, we are dealing with all journalists or folks from journalism related sort of background. There does need to be some personal responsibility that what you're purporting yourself to be is in fact something that can be held up. And I'm sure there have been instances where people have overinflated their credentials or misrepresented something, but then hopefully they are held accountable. And then the measure with them signing is that if it turns out that they straight up lied about something significant and that is detrimental to the society, then that could potentially be grounds for removal.
I think we're trying not to look back, but one of the things that was in the nominating committee report this year was some very nebulous allegation that somebody's campaign bio was inaccurate in some way. And I have never seen any evidence of what that is or had anybody explain it to me. But I think that one of the things we need to address is, how do we prevent that from happening? And I think that's what the nominating committee really needs to do.
I know a little bit of information on that. One candidate took credit for SPJ work in a particular region, and people in that region called out that candidate and saying, you did not do everything that you said you did. The folks in the region did those things. And so that was an issue that became a flashpoint, and why vetting candidates and their statements is part of what falls under our purview as we're trying to put things together. And that was not anything that came from national. That was something that sprang up as a local issue. And then, you know, I mean, journalists talked to other journalists, and it became more widely known outside that region. But that was the issue.
Okay, but it's come up in several of the board meetings, and so I mean, that's why, I mean, I think we don't want to have candidates recommend, the nominating committee recommending anybody, but we do need some quality control in the process of people not running.
Yeah, when I was pulling together things with regard to election timelines for items 3 and 4 that I hope we'll get to tonight from other organizations, they do have a bulleted list of criteria. And that may be something we want to put into the elections process part of our proposal. Right now, we're still dealing with, as I understand it, the functions of the nominations committee.
Well, I think maybe the nominations committee should be the entity to create those criteria, not us. Maybe our recommendation is that those criteria need to be created.
I'd be concerned about consistency, because one group could do one thing and one group could do another. And I think, you know, Matt's hoping to put this to rest with something that should cover and deal with the concerns that were raised. I'll certainly listen to what others have to say about that.
It seems like that if they're going to run the process of nominations, they should be I mean, we set it to rest by saying this needs to happen, and maybe the board needs to adopt a policy, but the people who should recommend that are the people who are going to do the recruiting and processing the nominations, I think.
Well,
I'm willing to listen to everybody, but
Well, my sense was that there was some lack of uniformity in carrying out the duties of the nominations committee, and that perhaps this was an attempt to try to establish some continuity from one year to the next, and then also some consistency in the process.
But so far, no nominating committee has survived from one year to the next since the reorganization. And we're trying to set up a nominating committee that survives over time and has people in it year after year. So, you know, the reason it hasn't happened before is there's been an ad hoc committee each year. And we're trying to stop that. But once we stop that, then we have a nominating committee that's capable of doing the things that need to be done.
Are we here to set the standards for the nominating committee, and if so, how deep do we want to get into that? That's one. Two, if we leave it up to one nominating committee, I agree, the next one that comes in could actually change the rules of engagement. So are we supposed to, my question to the group is, are we supposed to set the standards and procedures for the nominating committee from this point on?
I think we can propose what we choose to do. And another reason that I would propose developing that we put forward that list of criteria is so that candidates know what the expectations are and that they're consistent from year to year. And if they don't feel they can, meet those expectations this year, then they know what how, what the baseline mechanism for declaring your candidacy would be from year to year, whereas some nominating committees may focus on certain things one time, one cycle, and then you had different members the next time, and there may be different things. I'm looking at this down the road as an attempt to troubleshoot and figure out, okay, how many ways can people pick this thing apart, reinterpret it, misinterpret it, and all of those other ways that it could continue to cause flashpoints in the future. So I'm looking at trying to be more proactive in the policy development than having to be reactive down the road because it's not explicit enough. Now, on the one hand, we could say, well, we trust our nominating committee. But on the other hand, if I were appointed to a nominating committee, I would want as much written down as possible so I would know exactly what my duties are.
I think the criteria are going to change over time, and the nominating committee, yes, may modify it. But once we have a written set of criteria, and again, we don't have a lot of time. We have a bunch of issues and not a lot of time. So if we can say to the board, we need to have criteria, we have some examples of what those criteria might be, and this is one of the tasks the nominating committee has to address. And we may not get all of that done. They may not get all of that done in time for this election, but at least we've started a process with a committee that we expect to exist over time because members are appointed to 2-year terms and they're staggered. So, there should be, if the board does what we're recommending, there will be continuity in that committee. And so I think it's trying to.
But Robert, is the board seeking advice from us? I mean, specifics, not just generalities. Or is the board depending on us to submit to them the criteria for the nominating committee to go forth with, rather than, us saying that, we need to establish standards, but what are those standards? Or is it our responsibility, this committee's responsibility, to at least give them standards and procedures?
Well, in the bylaws, the only standards in the bylaws are that you will be a member in good standing of the society, and if it's a regional coordinator position, that you be a resident of that region, and if it's president-elect, that you either have served as a member of the national board, as a chapter president, or as a national committee chair. So the criteria that are in the bylaws right now are not overly great. I think our recommendation is that they need to be better. They need to be more specific. They don't need to be more, I don't think they need to be in the bylaws, but these are criteria. Here are some examples of what we think might work, but ultimately it should be developed either as a board policy, or it should be developed by the nominating committee and maintained, meaning as the reality of being SPJ evolves, they may need to change.
So let's take it from today, this moment, Nerissa. What is the suggestion? How do we proceed?
Well, Matt appointed us and announced it at the board meeting. I was on my way back from Louisiana, so I did not tune in to see the exact words of what he said, and I'm lazy. I haven't watched the recording of the board meeting. Matt has appointed us, and I think it depends on how we interpret whether/how the nominations committee should vet candidates and their statements. Matt was on the sponsorship task force with me last year, and he tended at that point to favor the more specificity, the better. And I mean, maybe it doesn't need to go in the bylaws, but I certainly think, and as I looked at other organizations to pull and cull their election timelines, I noticed that many of them did have the election criteria in the bylaws document. It was part of it so that members would know what the criteria were if they plan to seek office. So I don't think there's any prohibition that we can't include that. And I recognize our time is short, but you know, we have a lot of guidance from a lot of people. We have the policy, we have what's in effect now with Article 9. I don't think we're by any stretch of the imagination recreating the wheel. And if at some point standards change, then the bylaws need to be amended, as
No,
they have been
I
frequently.
disagree.
So
The
there is a
bylaws,
process.
we have tried to keep as much out of the bylaws as we possibly can because they're difficult to change. And I would not put criteria for elections as chairman of the committee. I would recommend that that not happen, that be a policy that the board adopts, because the board can change its policy easily. And we, go ahead.
You go ahead, Bob. I apologize.
And we have, over the past 20, 25 years, done the most we can to take that kind of stuff out of the bylaws. I don't care about other organizations. It's just been our experience over time that the bylaws define the structure of the organization and its basic form of operation, and everything else is in policy.
Okay, so from right now, this moment, how do you suggest, Narissa, that we proceed so we can get moving? I know, do we want to we can make suggestions and then let the board decide, but how do we?
I think we can go ahead with what we're working on now. And then if you know, you all want to send in some recommendations for criteria, I think we could propose a policy for board adoption, which would be a separate document from this, if the task force would choose to do that. I don't think there's any prohibition that we can't go beyond and do more than we've been asked to do. But I mean, I know, I mean, Bob and I have sat through many a business meeting, and we know how contentious they can be. And I believe he is correct in terms of the difficulty of making any bylaws changes. So I can appreciate where he's coming from there, but I do think it's possible for us to submit. We can also, as a separate document, and say, while we were going through this, we came up with this list of criteria, and we think it should be uniform and standardized as guidance for the nominations committee.
Okay, I agree with that.
Okay.
Can I just chime in with one final thought in that? And I don't pretend to know where it would best fit, bylaw, not a bylaw, different policy here or there. Maybe my lone role here is to, you know, voice of reason. Like, I'm just going to throw some things out that I think maybe could stand the test of what a threshold for making some sense into this would look like. And I think when we're talking about the vetting of a candidate, it's really about how it specifically pertains to their contributions as a board member. And I don't know any of the specifics about the incident from a couple of years ago with someone who maybe overinflated their role in a regional project. But I think based on the language or the framing of which we could say, hey, this is what's really the priority for the nominating committee each year, is to focus and to hone in on what the individual is precisely indicating are their credentials, is the related experience, what they will be bringing as it pertains to their role on the board. And so I don't know if in that example, if what that person said was sort of the crux of what their platform was, and then maybe they did misrepresent that, and that would be critical information. But I would think that maybe that's the starting point of the nominating committee, to say, hey, these are the 5 things that this person listed they're running on. We need to really focus on that. And if they oh, if they've embellished an award that they got back in college 15 years ago that has nothing to do with it, why would we do the forensic examination on things that really don't matter? Then at least that contains it to the things that are most relevant and could be manageable with regards to the committee's time and effort.
There is the standardized SPJ candidate questionnaire that is in the documentation that you have. I can't think exactly where that is, but it is in there where it says, you know, you are asked to submit a resume and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, what do you think are the biggest issues facing SPJ and what's your SPJ service and things like that. So that's part of what has been the standard candidate biographical information. That's the basics of everyone getting the same opportunity to put that out there as their initial campaign or part of their campaign candidates package or campaigning package, excuse me. So there is a mechanism in there for that. Again, I think maybe once we work through all 6 portions and we put all of our pieces together during the editing meetings, I think we'll find things that we need to smooth out, that we need to clear up and that type of thing. So if we've not dealt with it at that point, then we certainly will, because I'm taking notes of things that we're saying that we do want to make sure we circle back around for. But that is part of the standard candidate questionnaire. You can submit a photo, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Again, what I'm trying to emphasize though is the fact checking, the role that's played by the nominating committee. A person can turn in, you know, a 10-page biography, and I still stick with the note I mentioned a few minutes ago. Maybe they should have to sign that everything is true, and if not, there could be some repercussion. But to tie up the committee to go vet the 10 pages seems like a huge waste of time. If we're tasking them to focus on the 5 things that they've outlined in their questionnaire that speak to their relevance and contribution to why they're a really good person to garner votes, that seems to me that maybe is the threshold for what matters most. But just a thought.
But Victor, even if they turned in 5 or 10 pages, someone's got to read it and vet it, because somewhere in there could be something. That's the only way that you could find out whether or not, you know, there's something that's, you know, maybe questionable in this person's application. So at some point, someone's going to, you know, vetting means going through whatever they present to us. And in order for us that person or that committee to check off, let's say, those 5 boxes, they're going to have to go through this person's materials to see if it fits the criteria necessary to run for office.
Well, if it's that significant, I would recommend spending a few bucks and hiring a background, third-party service, because I would want zero part of a nomination committee if you asked me to go vet 10 pages worth of background material. So maybe you're right, and there's another approach here to solve for this, but I think it's asking a lot from people's time, in addition to all the other things around identifying and approaching the individual, convincing them that this is a good thing, and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Other thoughts? Claudia, I don't want to let you fall through the cracks there if you have something to say, or slip into a snowbank.
No, I'm still here now.
This is Maria. Sorry, I was having internet issues, so I had to log in with my phone.
Okay, hey, Maria.
But I mean, I kind of agree with many other things that Victor was saying. So I just, I mean, I think that's like he was saying, like going there in depth. Do we want to even hire somebody to do a background check for every candidate that runs that? So, I mean, that would be, if you want to completely make sure that there's nothing hiding in there. But I mean, I think that's, like Victor was saying, that's a lot to ask for a committee. So.
Well, I don't think we should be going into that kind of depth, but I think, if we have a set of criteria, people should be providing information that shows that they meet the criteria. And that's what I think the nominating committee should be doing, is looking at what they're submitting and saying, okay, this person does or doesn't. I don't think it needs to go, I mean, we're not doing background checks the way the government does to get a security clearance. Okay. And at some level, we do have to trust people. And I agree that we should get them to sign something that says everything I'm telling you is true. But, uh, you know, going beyond just making sure that they meet the criteria is I think, more than is expected.
If I were imagining hypothetically what Nerissa Young, the gospel according to Nerissa, that this committee would be doing is requesting a resume, the SPJ candidate questionnaire, which is kind of an application, making sure that that they report their committee work and their leadership work within SPJ, to make sure that they have, you know, either served as a regional coordinator or on the board previously, or also as head of one of SPJ's standing committees, or one of SPJ's committees rather, and 3 professional references. And I mean, we're pretty good at sniffing stuff in the wind, right? I mean, if something looks weird, and I was having a discussion with another SPJ member about this. I mean, we hired a pastor one time who had gaps in his resume, and my brother's on the pulpit committee. And I said, Jeff, you know, what was he doing during this time? And my brother thought, you know, I guess you're a woman, you shouldn't speak out about church matters. And he kind of blew me off. Well, he was a dud. I mean, the pastor was a dud. And we eventually just had to, you know, stop putting money in the collection plate so he'd get the idea and move on. I don't know if we'd have learned anything by looking at those gaps in the resume, but, you know, if we see something that doesn't look right, make a phone call. If they've submitted 3 professional references, you can make a phone call. I don't think we're looking at collecting fingerprints or anything like that, or that type of thing. I don't want to look at anybody's, you know, reporting clips. We're just trying to make sure that they're meeting some basic modicum of what we have kind of been doing informally to some degree up to this point. But again, if that doesn't need to be part of the bylaws, you know, we can put together, we think this is the evaluation tool that the nomination committee should use, and recommend that it go in the board book and that it be distributed with election information. But that's just my thought.
Okay, I just put the link to ONA's criteria into the chat in case anybody wants to look at it. And I think their criteria they set a much higher bar than I think we should set, but we can get to a level that we need.
But it's my understanding from you, Bob, though, that you don't want this to go in this document that we are preparing, because this goes to
it can go in our
bylaws,
report.
correct?
It should go in our report. But I would not recommend that if the bylaws be amended to deal with this. I think criteria can be set by the board
Okay.
and adopted as policy. And I think that's a wiser idea because of the difficulty of addressing miscalculations, shall we say, over
Okay.
time.
So my sense from what I've heard so far is that we think the nominating committee should vet candidates, that there should be some way of making sure that they meet eligibility criteria to be determined at another point in the process, maybe by other people. Is that the consensus?
That would work for me.
I see Xavier, I think, nodding ahead. Okay, thumbs up. Victor, does that?
I I guess I'm not convinced one way or another yet. And if I could just give it some more thought, or we want to put it in red and we'll punch it up at the end. To me, I think we're interchanging two things, and I get that they're connected, but there's the criteria and then there's the vetting. And I guess I'm just having a hard time tracking both because we keep sort of hopping back and forth.
See, I think the criteria are what we vet them for to determine, because the criteria aren't just, well, I'm a member of SPJ and I've been a chair of a committee, or I've done these things in SPJ. It's, do you bring to the board some skills that the board needs?
Okay.
I mean, one of the candidates for regional coordinator simply said, I have a better idea of what should be done, without ever identifying the better ideas. And she is no longer a regional coordinator. That was in Region 1. And there were all kinds of problems there. But we need to see more from people that say, what can you do for SPJ if you're on the board or you're
Got it.
a regional coordinator?
So that
Okay.
helps.
That's what I see the criteria as.
Well, that's good context, because I guess in my mind, I'm thinking about vetting really around credentials. But as you're framing that, Bob, you're suggesting it's sort of the totality. It's not just the background history, but it's what their ideas are for how they're going to advance the society based in this role. And that's what we need to focus on. Or I guess all of those things are what we would focus on.
And I think that's what the ONA criteria are aimed at. And just an example, I think that's what the criteria should aim at. I mean, first of all, if it's clips and things like that, I wouldn't qualify to run for the board because I haven't been a journalist in 30 years, which is one of the reasons why I have not run for the board, because I think journalists should run this organization. But you know, if I decided I wanted to, I certainly couldn't produce clips. But so,
Well, I
so
don't
I don't
want to
think
read
that's,
clips. I get enough of that in my job every day. So,
but I think it's what can you
All
do
right.
for SPJ?
okay, I think we're in agreement on that part. So let's move forward on this little nugget right here and say, let me propose this. Any member meeting the rather than minimum, let's just say eligibility requirements as outlined in SPJ bylaws and board policy, which gives the board an opportunity to develop that criteria, may stand for election, because again, we are getting away from this whole idea of recommendations and the good housekeeping seal of approval.
Right.
In accordance with the bylaws, candidates may add themselves to the ballot up to, again, this is an issue we're going to deal with when we look at the election timeline. So I'm going to put that in red so that we will remember to come back and visit that. Candidates who seek and do not renew, blah, blah, blah. I think we can just get rid of that whole thing, right? Because we're not doing recommendations.
Right.
Okay. Everybody
Right,
all
we
right
did.
with that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then all candidates' profiles will be posted to spj.org. And if deadlines are met, Quill Magazine. It's my understanding that Quill Magazine is not dealing with routine SPJ business as it once did. Larry, I mean this in total love, and I realize this is being recorded, but I think Quill is in the midst of a huge identity crisis and has been for some time. It doesn't really know what it wants to be, but apparently it is no longer dealing with election profiles. So having said that editorial comment, to spj.org.
Well, one of the things I think, one of the things we
and-
tried to do in 2011 was get SPJ to provide a mechanism for campaigning. And so not just
Mhm.
posted, and that requires people to actually get nominated early so that they can, but set up candidate forums, set up a page, you know, if candidates want them set up a place where they can talk to the membership. So it's not just posting to spj.org, but and that's one of the things I think we need to talk about in one of the other sections is what services will headquarters provide to candidates so that they can campaign. And so
Okay.
this paragraph may change after we have that discussion.
We could put in for right now, the board will establish a mechanism for candidates to get their messages to members, including posting profiles.
Well, why don't we just
to
not get specific about that yet?
SPJ.org.
Yeah, why don't we just not get specific about that until we get to the section on what this campaign process is going to be.
And just a note from the headquarters, I mean, we'll do what I mean, there are a lot of new ways that we can allow the candidates to reach out to people and stuff. So, I mean, God knows in another couple of years or less, we might have a podcast or something. So there are a number of ways that we can do this. For Quill, the actual magazine, I don't know, I'd have to ask Lou, but I don't know that he'd want to put it in actual Quill itself. Quill Mag, the website, might be a thing, but it's, of course, this is not my area of expertise. That'd be a Lou question.
Yeah, well, I mean, SPJ Election Central is going to be an easier way for them to find it anyway, because that's only about candidates and their information. Whereas if they do it in Quill Mag, got to dig around through archives and so forth to find it. So Election Central seems to me to be the best way. The nominations committee chairperson will coordinate. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. All right, I'm unstable too. We'll coordinate with SPJ staff to collect any missing biographical information for candidates and to create the official ballot with instructions on voting. I mean,
well, I think yeah, I think that create the ballot doesn't belong in this section. I mean, this section is.
This is again continuing with duties of the nomination committee.
I understand, but that's those two things don't.
Bob, time out. I'm saying that for the other folks. And okay. Can we let some other folks talk, please? Okay. Thank you. What do you think about this graph, folks?
What are we thinking about? I mean, like I'm reading it, but what is the concern, or what is there a backdrop here to this that we're not?
Well, do we?
No, I'm just saying that collecting the two things are not. They're not part of the same process. So if we're going to talk about creating the ballot, that's maybe part of their job, but actually it isn't, because the ballot is created electronically by the staff with the service that they use to do the election. So once they know the names of the candidates, that's all the nominating committee has to provide to create a ballot. Yeah,
we just say, here are the candidates. You all put the ballot together. So I think Bob's recommendation is to strike it.
And to create the official ballot.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be sending in their biographical information when they answer the SPJ questionnaire anyway. I don't have a problem with deleting it. But I don't.
I'm not talking about deleting the paragraph. I'm just talking about deleting the part information for candidates. After candidates, delete and to create the official ballot with instructions on voting. That's all that I'm saying absolutely should be deleted.
Anybody else?
Makes sense to me.
Okie dokie. that is item 2 revised. So let me save that accordingly. Yep, there it is. Cancel it, and we are good. All right, let me bring up item 3. And again, there's nothing specifically other than the 5 days and a January and an April reference in terms of an election calendar, or if somebody has a better word to describe it, please go ahead. Again, those are the only references. So the issue of determining when people are going to file, whether we establish a deadline and what that deadline in advance of conference will be is now on the table. And as you can see, we have some comments from several folks about what they think in terms of a time schedule. Here, section 3, 4, and 6 are from the current bylaws. And then Maria, of course, had put this forth from Healthcare Journalists, which again, you all got that from me, and Larry has loaded all that up. ONA, that Victor had suggested we look at. I pulled NAHJ, I pulled AAJA, NAJA, and NLGJA, and ACES. NAHJ, I did not find a timeline. Or no, yeah, that one's in there. Which one am I thinking of that's missed? NABJ, I did not find a timeline there, Xavier, but I could have missed it.
I could get that. It
Okay.
will be listed by then.
Okay.
I could. You know what? I could.
Okay.
I looked at it. I looked at it last week, and Xavier was right. It's a really extended timeline. They offer like 6 months,
Okay.
which is pretty unusual.
The reason for that is because we have different platforms. We're maybe in this process, we're a little bit further along, and we provide different platforms, and also allows the candidates to reach out to local chapters to kind of cultivate votes. So that's why the expanded timeline.
And some, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And some organizations that I looked at actually require that nominations, that the person collect like 25, 30 nominations from individual chapter members. And so they have to, kind of like a petition, so to speak. So the actual elections process is varied and interesting to look at in comparison. But anyway, you can see there's a lot of differences from 7 days to 30 days to 2 weeks to 90 days to 3 months to, so, what do we think is going to be reasonable with regard to SPJ? And again, this is what we have currently, is no later than April 1, a list of candidates. No later than July 1, we have publication, spj.org, Election Central, or wherever. And then this is the 5 days. Let's see, yeah, no later than 5 days. So this is our current timeline. So if we want to follow that, tweak it, make it different, or we can just put this part that's part of the bylaws forward.
I think there was general consensus in this group that make the cutoff 4 to 6 weeks before the convention. And there was a bylaws committee meeting this afternoon. You're going to get no opposition to cutting it off 4 to 6 weeks before the election. And I think what happened last year was, as of the beginning of July, there was only one candidate running for most positions. There was nobody running, I believe, for secretary treasurer, and there were no candidates for 2 of the regional coordinator positions. They were contested races in the end in all of the national offices. And all of those people jumped into the race after July 1st, many of them in August. One or two of them up to almost a week, a little over a week before the convention. And I think we want to stop that from happening.
Yeah, just a quick note. I know I talked to John today. He was asking me how this was all going, and I was mentioning that the 4 to 6 weeks is being bandied around, and he was elated. He said, please, if that could be something that could be agreed upon, that would be a great help to the headquarters.
Yeah, that brings me up to my question from last week, and that is, what is most reasonable for headquarters? Not, we can come up with an idea, but what do they see as reasonable?
I think that John would say that 4 to 6 weeks number would be fine. 6 weeks would be the best, but 4 to 6 would be, I think, would be manageable for us.
Yeah. And I think from the society's perspective, if people are in the race 6 weeks before the convention, then the membership has an expectation that those candidates are going to campaign, and the members are going to get to know the people or know why they're voting for somebody.
Now, I have a question. If I jump into let's say if I'm running for office and, I get in early. And I've been vetted. I know we hate that word, but I've been vetted. And then someone comes in, as it stands right now, just jumps in. What precautions do we have that this person is even qualified to be in the race?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we set the deadline 6 weeks back, so that the nominating committee has time to make sure that. To vet, well, there's going to be to check that they meet the minimum requirements in the bylaws.
Right.
But also, if we're going to vet people for, have they demonstrated that they are they can provide something to SPJ, then the bylaws committee, or not the bylaws committee, the nominations committee is going to vet this person the same as they vetted you. But then there's a period in which you're going to be campaigning, and that person is going to be campaigning, and they're not going to jump in at the last minute, maybe having enlisted 4 chapters to support them without anybody knowing that, and taking the election in the last minute.
I don't know. Is there any way of just evening the playing field and just put in an absolute date for everybody? Because I don't think anybody wakes up one morning and 6 weeks out or 4 weeks out or 5 days out and says, I think I want to run for office. I think you have to kind of give this some thought, because it's not an easy task to run. And once you win, it's something that you have to consider over several months, I would imagine.
But again, let's come back to what we're hoping will happen, which is that the nominating committee is going to be recruiting people over time who may run this year or may run next year, and so it's not just saying no, but we're not going to have anybody known until one date, 6 weeks before or 8 weeks before or whatever. I don't think that's really practical. People will decide at some point that they're going to run. We say nominations are open. The nominating committee is supposed to start at the beginning of January to find people to fill those slots. And we say, okay, 6 weeks before the convention, that's if you want to jump in, that's fine. But maybe all those slots are already, there's somebody running in for all of those slots already. So it's just, I don't know if that answers your question.
My only concern with 6 weeks is if we have a situation where a lot of people come in at the last minute, you have a nominating committee that is trying to turn all of this around and get the ballot information to headquarters, and they are trying to get that ballot made and ready to go while they are packing up the entire office to take it to the conference city, assuming at some point COVID does get away and we get back to being in person. You know, people who are working 10 and 12-hour days as journalists and volunteering for SPJ, I don't want to put a burden on national headquarters, but I don't want to put an impossible burden on the nominating committee, because they're also in that 6 weeks leading up to writing their committee report and vetting that through their committee members and getting it to the board at least 2 weeks in advance so that it gets into the board book.
In fact,
You know, and anything else that they need to take care of at the last minute. So if everything has to happen, the gist of it conceivably can happen in just the 6 weeks leading up to it, I don't think that's enough time.
well, but if their first report on a slate comes at the beginning of April, okay? Under optimum conditions, they've got candidates for all slots at the beginning of April. So if they end up with a few candidates at the middle of July, is that a big burden on anybody? As far as Joe Skeel was concerned, after running headquarters for starting in 2009, pretty much, the time necessary to create the ballot is not a big amount of time. Okay.
But they are also putting candidate information on spj.org. Don't forget that part, Bob. See, it's not just, oh, well, here's some names. We drop it.
Well, but you can have a deadline for getting on spj.org. That's not the cutoff for being nominated. You can say, we are providing these services to help you campaign, but you have to meet deadlines to use those services. That's separate from the deadline for, if you want to jump in at the last minute being 6 weeks before the convention, that's fine. But there's a detriment to you if you do that.
Two things. I want to go back to how, I guess, something that maybe Maurice, you mentioned, as well as I mentioned, kind of relieving some of the burden off of the nominating committee as well as headquarters as it relates to candidates running. And, how do we best do that? Yes, they say 6 weeks would be great, but can we do better?
What do you define as better?
Giving them more of a buffer.
You could say April 1st. Do you want to set that deadline 5 months before the convention?
Well, here's something I'm looking at. We sent, I guess, the election 2021 timeline, and I'm just looking at this. It seems that everything kind of, the president appoints a nominating chair in January. Let's say if on this timeline that we're looking at here, what if we shift everything back, or shift ahead back? Yeah.
That timeline is incorrect.
Oh, the timeline is incorrect. Okay.
In terms of appointment of the nominating committee chair.
Okay.
The nominating committee chair almost certainly will be appointed at the beginning of the cycle, which is in September.
Okay.
And the nominating committee membership, three members will change every year. 4 members will, because one of the members will be the immediate past president, and then 3 people who serve a 2-year term will rotate out or will be incumbents who are returned. So the nominating committee is going to be in place year-round. The chair, in all likelihood, will be appointed when all other chairs are at the closing business closing board meeting at the end of the convention.
Okay.
So this committee is going to be there, year round. And so that's not part of the timeline. Really has been, when does that committee start searching for candidates? And if it's operating properly, it should have a bench of candidates in mind that it can call on to fill vacancies, for example, when they know that an incumbent isn't going to run. But then you have people who nominate themselves or are nominated by somebody else. And so the cycle evolves. It's a progressive thing. It's not something that has to slam together all at one time.
Well, you're kind of contradicting yourself on your own logic. If we have that much time, then why do we want to wait till 6 weeks before the conference before we know who the people on the ballot are going to be?
Well, but you actually know who many of them will be earlier than that, because you've got a July 1st deadline for headquarters to get bios up on spj.org. Okay, and we could set that earlier. But the point is, we're not waiting until 6 weeks before to do anything. The only thing that happens 6 weeks before is nobody else can join the slate after 6 weeks before. That doesn't mean nothing has happened. The campaign is already underway.
So what if we take that option away from surprise candidates?
Is 6 weeks before a surprise candidate?
Yes.
Okay, so what deadline do you want to set?
I don't want to be the only one here. I'm just.
Oh, well, throw out a number. I'm just asking if you think 6 weeks before is a surprise candidate, how far before would not be a surprise candidate?
Without knowing, the impact on, I know, once again, I go to headquarters.
Let's forget about the impact on other people.
Okay.
Think about it in terms of a campaign.
Of the campaign. And I was using this as my guide sheet here, and since you said that this is off and not.
Well, in terms of having a nominating committee chair on January 1st, yeah, it's definitely off. That's the old schedule that we've been trying to break away from.
Okay. All right. How does June 1st? And once again, I'm just looking over some stuff is redundant, but June 1st.
If I could chime in here, this is an area that I feel a bit strongly about. There are two issues. The first one is, when would we begin to unveil the candidates? And I don't have a particularly strong leaning on that. I think everything I've heard makes a lot of sense, Bob. So I think that's good. Once that information comes in, it is then made available to those curious and wanting to get a jump on that awareness. But the component here that I am a bit of a stickler toward is the cutoff date. And where I was at last week, that I thought we had sort of arrived at pretty solid ground, was coming into last week, I was really open and embracing of quote unquote last minute entries, because what we talked about last week was not necessarily the reality that someone might wake up with a whim one day and feel like they're ready to run, but rather we are operating in a work environment within our industry that is incredibly transient right now. We have folks that are leaving after 1 year at places. They arrive somewhere and they're already thinking about the next thing, and that's pretty common. And a lot of times people are inclined to run, but they are letting something play out. And I worry that if we are going to go 10 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever we're now sort of wading into, that is going to remove some of the possible talent and thought that we could be bringing into this. Now, I wasn't quite as extreme now as I was last week, because some of these other associations are like 5 days before. Heck, even IRE, which I thought was really interesting and kind of novel, they'll allow an entry to enter into play after voting has already begun. You're digging out from a hole because the people you're competing against have already started tabulating votes. So if you can make up that ground and win, you're still eligible, which is like a whole different can of worms. I'm not looking to go there necessarily. But again, where I was feeling kind of a sweet spot was 4 to 6 weeks with the focus on garnering as much high-level thought leadership, people that are handcuffed because of situations playing out and may not know until a month out. But for what it's worth, if we're talking about going back toward the other conservative end of the spectrum, I'm getting a little nervous.
Well, if
Yeah, and I
you,
think,
oh, go ahead. I'm just thinking if
yeah, I think that's where I was. In terms of IRE, their election cycle is really short, as I recall. It's less than a month, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's sustainable. I'm sorry, I didn't. Maybe
Yeah,
I
right.
shouldn't have mentioned
Right.
it. I'm not
Right.
suggesting
Yeah,
that's an
but-
alternative we consider.
Yeah, no, I agree that people's positions changed. Somebody may decide that they can, they can't make a decision that as any earlier than 6 weeks. But 6 weeks out isn't a snap decision. They're still gonna they've thought about it enough that they still have time to campaign. So I'm open to anything. I just want to know what the limits are here.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking once again, we're in, Narisa, you brought up a point. If there are multiple candidates, how do we safeguard against something like that?
Multiple candidates in what's
At the-
same office?
Yeah, for the office within that period. Would we have an apparatus in place to kind of accommodate multiple candidates deciding, let's say 3-4 weeks out, that they want to jump into the race?
Well, if people are looking more toward the 6 weeks end of things, then I can appreciate what Bob has to say, that the deadline for SPJ's website, hosting your campaign materials and that type of thing, you would miss out on that opportunity. That if someone declares at the last minute, then the nominations committee would have to work quickly to try to get that through, and then push those names forward if they meet the eligibility requirements to, well, I guess the board could a phone meeting or whatever to be apprised of them, and then get those pushed on to headquarters with enough time.
The board doesn't get to vote.
Well,
Board does-
well, that may be something we want to change too, is do we even present the list of candidates to the board? I understand that, Bob, but I'm just, that's been the tradition, is you present the candidates to the board in April so they know, I guess, whether we have people running. But we can change that too, because again, we're not bound by what's happened in the past. We can be forward looking. But if we average conference hitting about the second weekend in September, and I know sometimes it comes in August and sometimes it comes that first weekend in September. It has been the third and the fourth weekend in August before, and we never know exactly when that's going to be. But if we look at averages around the second weekend of September, then that 6 weeks out would put it, July 31, and then August the 1st would be day one of that 6 weeks prior to it. So July 31st. But if we would want to back it up to July 20th, in case some years we would have a late August to still preserve that window. Again, it depends on when conference is, and it's never the same, we can't guarantee it will be the same weekend every year.
Then if we go with the 6 weeks, could we just word it in such a way that it's 6 weeks prior to conference? And that way,
No,
we're-
it's the same as, it's 5 days before it.
right,
So it can be 6 weeks.
yeah, so that
We
way,
can set it, it's gonna roll whenever the conference is, it'll be 6 weeks before.
yeah, and that way you're not boxed into a particular date. I don't know, if it's 6 weeks that we're going with.
Okay.
Marisa or Bob, I have a question. What is the reasoning to present the candidates to the board? It just seems odd to me in a way. It's
Well,
like
in
every-
April, one of the things, as I said, in April, there were, the secretary treasurer, there was nobody running. So telling the board in mid-April that this is the state of affairs, there's one candidate running for each office except for these, gives members of the board time to go out and beat the bushes if they know somebody who might be willing to run. But the board just has oversight to ensure that at some point, we've got a problem because we don't have candidates. So how do we deal with that?
I'm just kind of wondering because, I mean, looking at all the information that everybody presented from other groups, it seems like SPJ has the longest, I mean, period. I mean, other organization has, for example, ONA has like a few, I don't know, like a 4 weeks, three weeks open period for nominations, and then goes on to everything else. So I don't know. It just seems like, I mean, we should have a time frame where maybe on 10 weeks before the convention, nominations are open, and it closes 6 weeks before convention. So there is those 4 weeks where people can submit the nominations and things like that. And then after that, they can start campaigning, and and maybe the committee has 2 weeks to check everything out. And then they still leave 4 weeks for people to campaign and everything put up on the website. So I don't know. It just seems like an old.
One of the problems we have, and I don't know whether the extent to which any of the other organizations has it, about a third of SPJ's members are students. And from mid-May until sometime in August or early September, we lose contact with them. Because often the addresses that SPJ has to mail things, now a lot of them, most of them will be on email, but they aren't thinking about SPJ over the summer when they're doing internships and jobs. And so I think if we try to run our elections in a short cycle around the convention, we lose the students as voters.
So does that mean you're still in favor of 6 weeks out, Bob?
Yes, for nominations, for closing
Yes.
nominations, yes, I am.
Okay.
I am. When the one member, one vote first came up in 2004, the proposal was to have the election happen in August, even though the convention was going to be in September, because that was easier using paper ballots and mail for headquarters to deal with. But that would have disenfranchised all of our students. And so we're not disenfranchising anybody by saying the nominations have to close 6 weeks before, as long as we are mindful of when we have the attention of a third of our membership in terms of the vote.
Oh. Give me a second. There we go. All right, so what does this look like? The nominating committee shall be constituted no later than January 1. That gives the president the option to do that when all other committee leaders
No.
are named right
No.
after. Bob, can
No,
I
that's-
please finish a sentence? Thank you. This says no later than January 1. It doesn't stop anybody from starting the work earlier than that. It just makes sure that we have somebody on the ball doing something by January 1. Candidates must declare
standing
their intent to
committee.
seek office. Bob, may I please finish my sentence? Thank you. Candidates must declare their intent to seek office and which office no later than 6 weeks before the annual conference. They may declare anytime after January 1, because we know for sure at that point, the nominations committee is going to be looking at it. Thoughts?
Melissa,
I know you're opposed, Bob, but can we let other
no,
people talk?
let me explain why, please. The only standing committee in SPJ is the nominating committee. It exists at all times. It isn't constituted on January 1st. It exists continuously. That sentence doesn't need to be there at all.
That has been a previous part of the previous timeline to make sure that people were working as effect of January.
But that's the
1
error.
and
That's the
doing-
error we're trying to fix. We are trying to get to, when we restructured the board, we were very careful to make the nominating committee a standing committee so that it would be there all the time. And the people who wrote that policy did not understand what they were doing.
Okay, Bob, I do understand that part, but the question is, do we have one committee right now that is going to be in place January 1st?
It is in place already. And it continues to exist because only 4 of the 7 members turn over every year.
Once we get this into effect, once it's been fully constituted the first time, Maria, right now, Matt, I think last month, made the final appointments to the nominating committee to serve this year. So I don't really think that this, because we can't vote to make this a bylaws change until the conference. So this would not take effect until the 2022 elections cycle leading into that conference.
It is already in the bylaws. There's no bylaws change required. Okay, the membership is appointed, as I understand it, they appointed half the members to serve 2-year terms and half the members to serve 1-year terms, so that the next cycle would stagger the committee, so that next year only 3 will be appointed. So it already exists, and it is in the bylaws. So the only issue is setting deadlines or setting a schedule for nominations here. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding frustrated, but I have been trying to get this to happen for 3 years, because it should have happened at the end in 2017.
Okay, so what so if this is a standing committee, if it's year-round, what are we looking as a group here? What do we need to establish here? We've kind of established on the back end, I guess, that the 6 weeks. So there seems to be a gap between that 6 weeks and what, January 1st?
We have to establish a cycle for the elections to happen, beginning with nominations coming in. You know, it would be great to say, beginning January 1st, the nominating committee will accept nominations for the next year. And then set a calendar going forward from there, all the way through the convention, because, you know, you have the elections, but the primary thing for this purpose is, when do we start taking nominations? And when do we stop taking nominations? And things that are related directly, the timeline directly for the nominations process.
So what's feasible for, okay, if nominations start January 1st, how much time does the nominating committee need?
That depends on how much work they've got to do, what the criteria are going to be, and what they're going to do in terms of.
So my question to our group is, okay, if nominations start January 1st, do we establish a cutoff date for or is that something the nomination committee will, you know, what do we do? What do we
For that, we have to change the bylaws,
Okay.
because the bylaws now say 5 days before the convention. So this is, I think, something we should do.
So Narisa, what suggestions are on the table?
Okay, so I have here, the nomination committee will begin recruiting candidates January 1. Candidates must declare their intent to seek office, and which office, no later than 6 weeks before the annual conference. Candidates may declare anytime after January 1. Now, do we want to
Yeah.
put? I'm sorry, go
But
ahead.
that seems like we had to change the bylaws because the bylaws say 5 days, correct?
Well, no, that's the end deadline, the stop point, the last time you can take a nomination.
And are we going to suggest?
The bylaws are going to be changed anyway. The bylaws are going to be changed anyway, because what we are proposing is different from what currently exists. So
Correct.
if the delegates accept this, this will be integrated into the elections portion of SPJ's bylaws.
No, it won't. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It will not. It will be a policy. The bylaws, the only issue in the bylaws right now is the deadline for accepting nominations. All of the rest of the election process doesn't need to be changed.
Yes, I understand that, Bob, but what is the point of putting 6 weeks if in the bylaws say 5 days? So
Well,
there's-
because
there's
that
no
is the
point-
one change in the bylaws we have to make. The only
Exactly, that's what I'm
change,
saying. That needs to be changed in order to have everything
right? That
the
is
same
correct.
way.
But
So that
nothing
needs to
else
be
in what we
changed.
report, nothing else in what we report needs to go in the bylaws.
So Narissa, I guess that one sentence, candidates must declare intent to seek office, that's going to be a bylaws change. Everything else, Bob, you're saying it will be a policy change?
Well, right, there will be what the expectations of the nominating committee's process and the election already will be policy. The elections process is outlined in the bylaws. And the only piece of it that is problematic at the moment is allowing nominations up to 5 days before the convention. So that will have to be changed in the bylaws. If we decide on 6 weeks before, the bylaws will have to be changed to say 6 weeks before. But the rest of the nominating committee, the nominating committee is at least described in the bylaws, and the rest of this will all be in policy.
Larry, where are the bylaws on the website?
If you go to the Board of Directors page, and there's a link at the top of the list.
Okay. Board of Directors.
Right at the top, under Board of Directors, there's a link. No,
Oh.
right, a little bit down from there, under the title Board of Directors. There's a link. Above, one line above where your cursor was.
Oh, okay. SPJ's about, thank you. Okay. All right, so this is the section that deals with elections. So this is the Article 9 part, folks. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
I'm just going to wait just a few minutes to let us read that over. Oh, I'm sorry. I think there's a little more. Let me know when you want me to scroll down.
Go ahead. I mean,
Go ahead.
Ready for me to scroll down?
Yes.
So everyone had a chance to finish? Okay, I thought we were rewriting Article 9, so I apologize. I stand corrected. If we change the 5 days, and it sounds like we do want to change that to 6 weeks, then only that portion will be submitted for a bylaws change. The document we are preparing is a policy to go before the board for the board's approval.
And, if you want to go more than, for greater than 6 weeks back, that's okay. I'm just trying to figure out what the limits are. And if we're going back further, then why are we going back further?
Okay, so do we now understand what we're doing? All right. So let's go back to what we were looking at most recently. And this can certainly be included in the board policy, but this portion would be what would constitute the bylaws change. So
Okay,
that is-
yeah, okay.
go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, in terms of the nominating committee recruiting, I think that's a year-round thing. I think when people, we can say, if you want to state your decision to run, then we'll accept applicants from January 1st. And we're hoping the nominating committee will, as I said, will over time have a bench. So they'll be recruiting as they meet people whom they think are likely leaders for the future. But people who outside that process say, I want to run, start doing that at January 1st, and they have to do it by whatever we say is 6 weeks before or whatever deadline.
Okay, so this line will be part of our proposed policy to the board, but also this would be a single item on the agenda. Is it prepared as a resolution, Bob?
Well, I think it's done. You're going to submit it to the board. They're going to decide what they want. If it's a board policy, then somebody will make a motion to adopt it at the board meeting. There's no resolution. This doesn't go to the convention. Policy matters don't get approved by the convention. They are board policies. They are adopted by the board. So, we will put whatever deadline we set to change the 5 days to whatever, that will go in an amendment to the bylaws. I will include that in my report to the board in April as a bylaws
So
amendment.
this is the only thing that will go on I'm talking about the business meeting. These two sentences, do they need to be put in the form of a resolution?
No, because they don't go to the convention. This is the board policy. The board can adopt it in April if it wants to.
So we're going to approve this, and if the board doesn't approve the policy, then there won't be any grounds to do a bylaws change then, if the board votes this down. I'm just trying to understand who we are writing for.
You are writing for the board only. You are making a report to the board with a recommended policy. We can change the bylaws independent of this policy. If this group, what I have to do is I will make a recommendation as the chair of the bylaws committee to amend the bylaws. They could accept that or not as they choose. They can send it. In other words, they could send it to the convention, the bylaws amendment only. They can send to the convention. If they don't like it, they can say no. Okay.
Pardon my French, but we've spent 94 minutes and haven't accomplished a damn thing. Is that the nut graph you're telling me?
No, we have accomplished something. We've talked about this schedule, but the procedure here is Only the board has to approve it. So if we as a committee recommend a policy to the board can vote that policy into effect without the convention. It can do it the day it gets it. So our recommendation to the board is, here's what we think should happen in terms of the nominations process. Okay, so we're going to say, you know, the nominating committee is there. It's recruiting all the time. People who want to nominate themselves, or somebody who wants to nominate somebody else, will accept applications on January 1st, but the close of applications is going to be whatever, 6 weeks before the convention. That's all we got to say to the board on this topic.
Okay, so the stuff about April 1 and all that that's in the bylaws, then that's binding on them. That April 1 deadline and that July 1 deadline for the election materials, those are already binding, correct?
But yes, but they are. But keep in mind that they're framed as no later than, which means that we could recommend a schedule that's different than that. That's earlier than that if we want to. But the point is, those deadlines are no later than X date. This will happen.
Yeah, but if it's in the bylaws govern.
But the bylaws say no later than April 1, no later than July 1. So we could recommend a policy that says we think it should happen May 1, and that would satisfy the bylaws.
Okay, folks, so where do you want to go from here on, do you want to fill out any more of the calendar? Or do we just want to let what is in the bylaws continue to cover? Or do we want to recommend other deadlines for a list of candidates to be presented to the board for its information? And do we want, you know, to say that we think, you know, candidate stuff should be in, you know, June 1 if they want to get the free pub? Do we want to make that different from July 1? What's the thought?
I guess I'm speaking on behalf of headquarters. If whatever we could do to make life easier for them so that they don't have to revisit or have to be bogged down with any of this, and it falls within and it's reasonable to the general body, you know, if it's sooner, then so be it. But you know, that's if we want to even address, you know, but we have some leeway here, judging from the bylaws.
So I mean, I think one of the things we want to say is the headquarters is going to provide services to candidates so that they can communicate. But
Right.
In order to use those services, you have to meet a schedule that we're going to set.
Yeah.
Does someone want to recommend a date?
Well, if we're going to look, are we going to look at the whole calendar or just, I mean, what we're talking about now is what deadline are we going to set in order to get the services that we're campaigning? What services are we going to provide? And what's the deadline for getting them?
Well, the services are in, I think, item 4.
Okay.
This is the calendar part.
Well, but this is only one piece of the calendar. It's submitting your nominations. Is
Larry still on?
Live and ready.
I just want to make sure you're still awake. What are the current services offered by headquarters right now? And what do you foresee within the next calendar year as it relates to what we're talking about?
No, I won't claim to be a total master in all these things, but I know obviously they have their profile on Electric Central. There often is, and this necessarily isn't through us directly, but there's often been a interview that's been done either through a podcast or the website. Obviously, that they're put on the ballot earlier too. So
Well, but putting on, again, the ballot is a mechanical process. In the past, John Enslin, when after he was president, started doing these little podcasts with each candidate. And in some years, those have happened. Other people have done them. We don't want to give members the email list for a lot of reasons. So we need to make it possible for candidates to communicate with the membership without having email addresses for all of the members. And one way is for possibly for SPJ to send out an email, not leads, but something else that is a bunch of campaign stuff from candidates, or links just so that the members can get to the candidates' bios and maybe a candidate page on the website.
yeah, and I can see that, Bob, with what you're saying, because rather than having, I think it'd be a great idea just having, because a lot of times the people are running or having their own websites and stuff like that. So if we could just say, and these people are running, and then hot link to whoever has additional information. That way everyone has access to what they want to put on.
Yeah, I mean, you can start a little
what kind
website or a blog or something,
Yeah.
and
So
have
what's,
the link to that.
which brings us full circle here. What sort of a cutoff date should we suggest to the candidates who declare? I'm sorry, a candidate is a person who declares. I'm getting wacky here. What sort of a cutoff date so that they can take advantage of SPJ free service to the membership, so to speak? What are we offering? What should be a reasonable cutoff?
Well, I mean, if you say that the deadline for becoming a nominee is 6 weeks before, to give the nominating committee the chance to vet that last 3 people who decide they're going to run, maybe you say it 5 weeks before, we're going to send out an email that includes links to your campaign stuff. I mean, I'm just throwing that out as a discussion thing.
I'm confused about something. What happens between the April board meeting and the 6-week period before that we're talking about? What's happening in between then?
I assume that if there are people who are nominated, that the nominating committee is doing whatever it's going to do to vet those candidates. And, I don't know how many that is at any given year. The nominating committee has just made the report what the status of the campaign is, or the number of candidates in April. Probably they also would do it in June before the June board meeting, if that's changed, and it probably will have. And then the campaign can be going on even beginning whenever in April. And I would hope that at least by sometime in February or March, Leeds is publishing a notice that we have, this election is coming up. Do you want to run? And they're doing that on a regular basis until we have candidates for all the positions we got to fill.
I'm sorry, Narisa, we've kind of ventured off here, but what
No,
was
I
your
want to hear what other people had to say. I'm just waiting to
Yeah.
let other people contribute.
I think one of the
If the
problems
deadline is
we,
6 weeks before, then
go ahead.
if the deadline is 6 weeks, if the deadline is 6 weeks before, then the no later than April 1 and the no later than July 1 that are already in the bylaws would seem to suffice.
Suffice for what purpose?
That we don't need to make any other recommendations other than the 6 weeks, because July 1 would be the deadline to take advantage of the help that headquarters staff offers. And then April 1, you just simply publish a list of declared candidates to the board. I mean,
Well,
I think those work well with establishing the cutoff declaration point of 6 weeks before. I'm
Well, I
not
think the
sure
second
what
one-
we would accomplish by saying more than that.
the July one, that's one that says no later than July 1, the bios will be up on the website for the people who have candidate, but they could start going up as soon as people become qualified, because the nominating committee has said they're qualified. So those who get in early can start campaigning. Their stuff is going to be up on the website. The July 1 deadline is, again, the outer limit for when headquarters staff has to have that stuff up. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't go up earlier for candidates who get in the race earlier.
So I guess I'm not really seeing a need for us to add anything beyond what we have.
Just for clarification, so that means that if they declare within by the 6th week before convention, and that obviously is going to be after the July 1st deadline, so that means that their bios is not going to go on the website?
I think that's, if headquarters, I think no, it's what it is, again, that July 1 thing is there just to make sure that at least, in effect, 60 days before the convention, before the election happens, that staff will get whatever it has up. That doesn't mean that we can, that's the cutoff for doing it. As I said, we could say, if we set the deadline for becoming a nominee at 6 weeks before, we could say the deadline for getting your bio up is 5 weeks before, or could be the 6 weeks before. But the point is, that's a different issue than insisting that staff have it up by a certain date if they already have the stuff, so that candidates, so that the members have the 60 days if that's a bit possible.
Well, according to the existing bylaws, section 3, no later than April 1, the nominating committee shall forward to the board of directors and executive director a list of qualified candidates for each officer, director, and regional coordinator position to be filled. Section 4, no later than April 1, or excuse me, no later than July 1, the board of directors shall publish the names and qualifications of candidates for elective office and for at-large director and regional coordinator positions to the society's membership. Section 5, national staff and officers will do everything feasible to facilitate interactive forums online for each candidate to respond to members' comments and questions. So I don't guess it does say that it wouldn't necessarily be included. So again, I'm not sure why we need to say anything else if we have established that. I don't see why we need. I think this lays things out, and it's already in the bylaws. So the only thing that we're recommending that be changed with regard to this calendar would be that the deadline to file, to announce your candidacy would be 6 weeks before the conference.
But I think we're talking about the nominating committee process, but we're also talking about the campaigning process in another section of this thing, right? not what's before us right this second. But so in terms of the campaigning thing, I think we have to lay out a schedule of what we expect to happen in terms of, how early, for example, would a candidate be able to communicate with the membership if they wanted to? How, when is the last date they can send something to headquarters and expect that it will be transmitted to the membership? That's a different part of the calendar than this nomination stuff. That's the campaign piece.
Okay, yeah, that's either item 5 or 6 that we haven't gotten to yet, that deals with
Right.
the actual nuts and bolts of how SPJ National Headquarters facilitates the campaigning and elections. We haven't gotten to that part yet. So do we want to set up, do we want to make recommendations on, do we want to set any other deadlines that touch on the nominating and elections process beyond what we have here? Do we want to, in other words, do we want to be more explicit? With what we recommend to the board,
I don't think we need
and
to
that
do.
they in turn would direct the headquarters staff to do. Okay, I don't hear anyone. So do we want to move on to item 4?
If we can do it fairly quickly.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, let's move to number 4.
All right. Okay. I'm going to keep those bylaws up in case we need to refer to them again. Okay. This has to do with endorsements, whether there should be limits, whether they should be specified from SPJ leaders and groups, and that those groups include the national board members, which includes, the top level officers, regional coordinators, chapters, committees, and communities. Again, these are recommendations. It has been a tradition that folks who served on the national board would remain neutral in elections, that they would not endorse anyone, or if it were a physical convention, wear any campaign paraphernalia, etc. And before, when we had regional directors, of course, they were also on the board. Now we have regional coordinators who are liaisons with local chapters and the board, but they do not actually sit on the board. So they are not, they are elected by the folks in the region, but they do not have national board status anymore. This again came out of some concerns from the 2020 election cycle, in which certain officers within the board made some endorsements and recommended, or even chapters and so forth. So whether endorsements should be allowed, and if so, at what level, and involving, which people who are serving at which level. Should we adopt a formal policy of no endorsements, period? So again, you have some recommendations and discussion from various folks here that I hope you had a chance to look at. So I will, I'm open to hear what people think.
My personal opinion, I think board members as well as regional coordinators should stay above the fray and be neutral.
Okay.
Why is that?
Because why?
Yeah.
The reason I think it eliminates any sort of controversy, or it eliminates any sort of speculation that the election is unbalanced. And I don't think the governing officials should be endorsing candidates.
In the real world, it happens all the time. And again, we have one member, one vote. Well, you know, that policy is a hangover from when we had delegate voting, when there were 100 people who voted for the leaders of this organization, and they were all at the convention, and the membership didn't have a say. At this point, we have somewhere around 1,000 people vote, of which there may be 300 or 400 at the convention when we have one. So the fact that, you know, an officer or an RC who really doesn't, and the dispute this past cycle was that 11 of the 12 RCs got together and endorsed candidates for officer positions. And those candidates all lost the election. So for what it's worth, the endorsement that they got from all the RCs didn't change the outcome. It didn't influence the outcome in their favor.
One other reason to say that endorsements should not be allowed would be to indicate a spirit of trying to get away from the old boys network. Because I recognize what happened in 2020, you know, was an aberration. We had a lot less, which is fairly unusual. And the fact that people were pretty open about endorsements, which we had not seen in the past. But I do know that, again, going back to when delegates were voting, especially, you know, you had to seek approval or blessing from certain people to run for office. And if they were for you, then you were okay. If they weren't, you were in trouble. You would court certain chapters because you knew how many delegate votes they were going to have. So, you know, SPJ has very much been an old boys, old girls kind of white newspaper perceived organization for a long time. And to disqualify endorsements would seem to be in harmony with the idea that we want to recruit broadly and encourage and bring people up who can be leaders who may not be white former newspaper people who've been in SPJ for 30 years. And that they wouldn't have to seek anybody's permission or blessing.
And you said they used to court specific chapters because of the number of delegate votes they had, which is exactly what we eliminated by passing one member, one vote. It doesn't matter how many.
But we're talking about endorsements here. You know, it's still, you know, board members still vote, but I don't think it's right to have a board member and all that position brings with it endorsing a candidate, because then it's almost, you know, that means that board member is anointing could be, the next leadership, and I'd like to think that in an open and fair election that board members should remain out of the fray, because they are responsible also for the election process. So I don't think it's a good idea to have, someone who's overseeing the election process to be endorsing a particular candidate.
Actually, the election process is overseen by staff, and which reports to the sergeant at arms at the end of the convention about what the vote counts are. The board is not at all involved in overseeing the election process. Okay, so we do draw the line at board members and not RCs who are not. RC is elected only by the members in his or her region. Does that mean an RC shouldn't be allowed to endorse a candidate for president-elect who may not even be from that region? Likely wouldn't be.
I think in just getting away from endorsements, basically so we could break out of the cycle that SPJ's always had. We have the same exact people on the board, executive board members, positions, and it doesn't allow for other people from out of who typically aren't involved as much as the ones that always get elected. And that's what and the endorsement kind of like perpetuates that and kind of I guess you could say encourages that. And that's I mean honestly I agree with the regional directors or the board members shouldn't be endorsing anyone, because I mean we're just going back and back around the same circle for how many years I've been on SPJ.
There's been, for some reason, I don't know how this got started, but the immediate vice president somehow automatically got appointed to SPJ's ethics committee, which is one of the most active and most powerful committees in SPJ. I mean, we have seen so much recycling. I mean, I believe in the First Amendment, but even though the ones who were endorsed lost, it was a problem raised by those who won as a concern.
Okay,
So,
and I want to ask, I don't know the answer to this question. Do NAHJ, NABJ, NAJA, AAJA, ONA, do any of those organizations have a policy that their leaders can't endorse candidates?
NABJ, no one, because no, you can't do it. I can speak on behalf of NABJ. No.
No, what, you can't endorse, or no, they don't have a policy?
There is a policy and you cannot endorse a candidate.
Okay.
For that reason, they don't want to give any illusion of impropriety.
Okay. Any of the other organizations?
I don't recall. I looked at a lot of them, but I wasn't necessarily looking at that when I was pulling materials on the election timeline issue. Other thoughts from other folks? Did we lose Victor? He's probably eating a baked potato and T-bone steak somewhere. Well, the West Coasters are hanging with all the bars.
Okay, I'm ready to, we need to end this conversation for tonight soon. We don't need to finish this tonight, but we do need to end the conversation soon.
I think this seems to be I don't know, unless
Okay, I mean, we might be able to, but I'm not saying, I'm just saying, it is 11:04.
Oh, it's still early.
Here on,
It's still
I know
early.
it's still early for you guys,
Not that I want to spend another 2 hours,
right? It's
but-
not early for me.
So
I think I might incline with Servier and and Claudia, that I would prefer to have a no endorsement policy or recommendation.
Now that SPJ has adopted 1 member, 1 vote, no board member, regional coordinator, excuse me, let me add chapter, committee or community shall endorse candidates.
I don't think we have the
This
authority to tell
follows-
chapters or communities what they can do. They are independent
follows-
bodies.
This follows the spirit of encouraging a broader recruitment of officers of leadership. Okay, we've heard Bob. Other
Yeah.
thoughts on what's written?
He's right. I don't think that you could regulate a chapter, so we may have to take that out.
Okay. Okay, other thoughts? Again, we're just looking at this portion.
And I don't think I, as a chair of a committee, give up my right to speak about candidates either.
I disagree. Depending on your committee, if you're on the nominating committee,
I'm on the, oh, no, I'm not on the nominating committee isn't going to do endorsements, but I'm on the bylaws committee. I'm on the ethics committee. I'm on the FOI committee. Why should I give up my right as why should a consequence of my volunteering a lot of my time be that I'm silenced?
I don't think that
I
that will
strongly
silence you.
disagree
I mean,
with
you
that.
can, I guess you can just support the candidate that you like the best, but you're not going to endorse everybody as representing the entire committee. And committee should not endorse as a whole anyway. So I just feel like also the committee should not be endorsing a group or a person or anything. And
Okay,
even if
but-
I'm
but
a
you
member of the membership committee or the diversity committee, I think I, as a member of the committee, I should not be endorsing for the entire committee.
Well, I'm not saying endorsing for the entire committee, but what does that mean? Does that mean as a group, we couldn't do that? Or I, as a member of a committee, can't endorse?
I think both, because as a member of that committee, you represent that committee. And it would be kind of difficult to distinguish you, the individual, and you, the committee member.
Especially if
we're
that committee member is a chair of that committee.
Okay. So I either have to, if I want to endorse a candidate, I have to resign from my committee? I don't think so. I don't think so. This is an organization that's based on the First Amendment. I am an individual. I am not an elected member of this officer of this organization. And quite frankly, I will definitely oppose that if that goes in.
And I would disagree, and I would, I think we can go back and forth on this, but as a committee chair, it's, I don't see that, I can see where that could cause some problems.
Okay, we're going to disagree on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to vote on this paragraph
I
to
think,
determine whether it goes into the revised version for later editing? How do you want to proceed?
Well, again, I think we don't, I think you don't have, community needs to come out, just like chapter. For sure.
What about the rest of you?
committee or.
You gotta,
As groups, meaning that the ethics committee is going to endorse thus and so, or the freelance community is going to endorse thus and so.
well, we just discussed the fact that we don't have authority to tell chapters what they can and can't do. We don't have authority to tell communities either. Communities are the equivalent of a chapter. And we're actually proposing bylaws amendments this time that will make that official. That a community and a chapter are on equal footing. So
Xavier,
communities,
is
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was listening
Xavier, is that what you were saying?
yeah, give me a definite, yeah, I know definitely chapters because we operate as, in a separate, we're within the universe, but we're still in kind of separate orbits as chapters. Communities, I'm not familiar with. You'd have to.
communities, there are 3 active communities at the moment. 2 of them are fairly large, the freelance community and the international community. And in fact, if the freelance community was a chapter, it would be like the 3rd largest chapter in SPJ. It is a group of people who are not bound by geography, but bound by the fact that they have a common professional interest, like freelancing.
Are they like a 501c3?
They don't, none of them have, are collecting money in any way at this point. So they do not have that issue. But they go through fundamentally the same chartering process that chapters go through.
I know as a chapter, we're a 501c, which.
Right, because you want
Yeah.
to be a nonprofit and get money.
Yeah.
None of the communities at this point are getting money for anything.
So
They
how,
are strictly volunteer groups.
and they're governed by SPJ?
They're governed by a board of directors that's elected by them, by their members. And the
Whereas a
intention
committee
is part of SPJ National.
whereas a committee is usually dealing with some aspect of SPJ's mission, and it has limited membership, specifically appointed, and they, for ethics or freedom of information, or the awards committee, they're carrying out specific duties
Yeah, that.
as part of SPJ's function. So that's the difference between a committee and a community.
Yeah, it's the community that I'm not sure about, in this document. The committee, yes, but the community.
Now, the communities are independent bodies under SPJ. As I said, they have been created using the same chartering process that chapters have, and they are independent of SPJ, but made up of SPJ members.
Wow, that's interesting.
And the stated one of John Schertzer's stated goals is to create 3 new communities in the next year.
As opposed to a committee.
No, yeah, because what happens is chapters are geographically based, and we have a tremendous number of members who live too far from chapters to have any benefit.
I understand the chapter part of it, but I mean a committee versus a community.
Right, and what I'm explaining to you is the chapter, the geographic model doesn't work for a lot of SPJ members. But an interest group model works for them because they are meeting with people who do the same thing they do.
Xavier, this is Larry.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost like an affinity group. For example, I'm participating in a group called Indiana Landmarks, and it's a historic preservation organization. But within that group, they have an affinity group that's called Indiana Automotive, which they're all about, cars and stuff. So that it's like they all have a similar interest. That's kind of a subgroup within the big organization.
The American Bar Association has sections that, like criminal law, commercial law, things like that. That's what communities are.
Okay,
And-
then I guess we eliminate it. And if we can't govern them,
We don't.
and
They govern themselves.
they don't fall within our and SPJ's bylaws at all?
They are referred to once or twice in the current bylaws. If the amendments we're proposing are approved, they will be the functional equivalent of chapters.
Okay. Here's what we have now. Is everyone in favor of pushing that forward to a revision, to a revised version?
I will oppose it.
That's good to me.
Do we want to take a vote on this paragraph?
Yeah, since we're on the record, I guess, I guess we should. Yeah.
Okay, those who are for this paragraph, and I put in here a committee as a group so that individual committee members can, but
But you've put the chairperson of a committee in as an individual.
Is there other comment before we vote then? Does someone other than Bob want that part taken out? Or does that constitute a somewhat of an equivalency to an upper level leadership position? Is it Maria? Did you?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'm here.
Did you want
No,
to say?
I am okay with the way it's written right now.
Okay. All right. Okay, then I'll go ahead and call for a vote. So as this paragraph is constituted, those who are in favor of moving this into the other sections to be considered later in revision, please say aye.
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 Those who are opposed say no.
No,
Okay, so it will go forward to be considered as we're making revisions. Okay, items 3 and 4 were on our original agenda, so we'll stop for tonight and I'll pull some things together for 5 and 6 for next week. Thank you, everybody. This was a lot of hard work, but I think we made some progress tonight and I appreciate all of you and for hanging in there. Anybody have anything you want to say before we adjourn for the evening? Thank you, Larry, for hanging in with us. All right, have a great week, everybody.
all later.
Look for things.
Good night.
Look for things coming from me and for things to go to Google. Good night.